Hello! It's my actual face on screen for once. You've not seen this in a while, have you? So I figured that because it was summertime and school is finishing for many people are going to be going to study film at university pretty soon. And I have some experience with that, so I figured I'd share. So across my university career, if you want to call it that, I read a lot of books and I quoted a lot of books in essays. So I figured I would show you some of the books and tell you what I thought and tell you what I think someone studying film will actually need, because I didn't know that going in. So I think for most film courses it's fair to divide it into two main chunks: the theory side of things and the practical side of things. So let's do theory first. Behind me there are some books. I'm gonna talk to you about them. I divide these into two-ish categories. The first one is right here, it's just out of frame, and it's general reference books. And I have too many of these. Wait, I'm gonna try and pick them. I'm gonna try and pick them all up. I'm not faking this. Oh god, that's so many books. So when I think about theory books, I think about how useful they're actually going to be to reference in essays. This whole stack of books is great because you can reference them in pretty much any essay at all. Like, seriously, they're all great, and there will never be an essay where none of these books are of any use to you. And another thing that's great about them is, for the most part, books like this, they reference other books and other essays, which means that if you want more things to reference in your actual essay, then you can just follow the trail of breadcrumbs to the relevant, original texts that they keep on referencing. The only thing I would say is you do not need as many books as I have. You don't need 7 of these. You don't. You need maybe 2, maybe only 1. If you're gonna have only 1 though, I would say the Cinema book, edited by Pam Cook. It's excellent. This is all you need. So this has the entire history of film divided by movements and by countries, and pretty much every section references a whole bunch of other essays and books, and this is such a good starting point for whatever essay you will be writing. Look, Spanish cinema, sound, classic studio system, Hong Kong cinema, post-war globalism in Hollywood. There's Arnold Schwarzenegger right there. Great. That being said, whilst I love this book, it's mainly for actually referencing in essays. Being dyslexic, I kind of struggle with big blocks of text, and that does have a lot of that, as does Oxford Guide to Film Studies and Cinema, the whole story. These are all big blocks of text. Even this little one is a big block of text. If you're not just looking for books that are useful for referencing in essays, then I recommend these two. If you actually want to read them and learn some stuff about film history and the art of film, these are great. The graphic design of this book is wonderful. You get cool things like timelines in here. Everything's really nicely divided up, in sections on the page. It really breaks things down. It's got a pretty much chronological order, so you can just follow it through and trace different movements across time. It's really useful, and doesn't require my dyslexic brain to do too much work reading big old chunks of text. Same is true for this one. I don't quite like the presentation as much. It's a little bit that's just a block of text with a picture on one side, and But it's a really good companion piece to the movie book, which does everything chronologically, because this one breaks things down into different ideas, big picture kind of things, like the idea of voiceover and newsreels and expressionism, and the impact of movie moguls and Nickelodeons. This is really good to take a slightly different approach and learn a lot about film history in a non-linear way, which will be really helpful when it comes to actually writing essays, even if it's not actually that useful as a reference book. So those are the general reference books. I also have a bunch of specific reference books, and these ones are a little bit more difficult to recommend. So once you've got books that are good for pretty much everything, I would say it's worth getting a couple of books that are interesting to you personally and are about topics in film that you care about. Which means that when I show you these books, they're personal to me, and these might not be the books that you end up wanting to get. So these are the three that are probably the most useful to me. The fictional Christopher Nolan looks at the films of Christopher Nolan through the lens of philosophy, and my goodness, it's interesting. I've not read it all the way through. I've probably only read 1 or 2 chapters all the way through, but I've dipped in many places, and it just, having this as a reference text makes a lot of essay writing a lot easier. I knew that I could just link things back to Christopher Nolan, and I would have a solid textbook that I could draw in, and it would be taken seriously as well as being interesting to me. This one, which is British cinema in the 1990s, is surprisingly useful. There are lots of things in British cinema in the 1990s that I found really interesting, like Danny Boyle, really cool filmmaker. I really like the work of Guy Ritchie, So Sue Me. It's just really good. It's got a really broad range of things in a really niche little package. If you're talking about modern cinema history, like anything after the 1990s, this is really useful, because a lot of these directors ended up being big players on the world stage. Like, someone who directed one of the Harry Potter films is here, so you can probably reference it in terms of that. Like I said, Danny Boyle, who's won many Oscars. Like, it's good. It's really useful. Finally, Big Book of Noir. It's a terrible cover, but it's a good book underneath. Well, I say it's a good book. Part of what makes it good is it's not actually a book so much as it is a collection of essays, which is so useful because you can reference this book 3 times in the same essay and just call it 3 different things, because you can reference it once as Kill Me Again, The Rise of Nouveau Noir by Stephen Hunter, and then you can reference it a second time in the same essay as Spy vs. Spy, John Huston and the Kremlin Letter by Peter Richards. It's like a whole bunch of books in one, and I love it for that. And I don't know if you can tell, but I really like noir, so this useful book for me. I also got these 2 books after I finished, which are both really interesting, but again, like I said, reading huge amounts of text, not really my strong suit, so like this tiny writing, and that's how thick it is. I'm not gonna read the whole thing. These would have been very useful, I think, for me if I was still at university, but not so much anymore. Something like this, again, would have been very useful because it's about 3 different incredibly influential directors. Orson Welles, Hitchcock, and Stanley Kubrick. I'm not the biggest Stanley Kubrick fan, which I know is weird, but he's never really done it for me. Orson Welles and Hitchcock, though, oh boy, I like them. So yeah, this one would have been useful to me, but I didn't use it, so it wasn't. So, now on to practical filmmaking books. Where the other books were mostly useful for how you can use them in essays, these ones are actually useful to read to get the information into your head. I'm actually going to start with one that I don't think I quite recommend, which is this book, Cinematic Storytelling. So this book breaks down 100 different film conventions and shows how they can be used and the effects that they can have. Whilst it's useful to have them all in a single book, I wouldn't say you need this book. I think if you just watch enough Brilliant Moments things from Cinefix and Every Frame a Painting videos, you're gonna get everything that's in this book. That being said, if you like a physical thing and you like images on a piece of paper and writing on a piece of paper, then by all means do. But personally, I think something like this isn't really necessary because the internet exists. I think that's also a similar point to keep in mind with this book, which is DSLR Cinema. Whilst all this information does exist out there on the internet and you don't really need it in book form, I found this really useful. Just because I like having a physical thing and it's all broken up so well, like the chapters and practical camera things. This is great because it teaches you how to do everything on a DSLR, and then if you move to different cameras at other points, it's really useful for helping with settings and with storytelling, and it's good. It's good. This book is good. This book is really useful. And finally, I'm going to move on to the one book that I would say everybody needs to read if they want to be a filmmaker, On Filmmaking by Alexander Mackendrick. Get this book, okay? Get this book. So Alexander Mackendrick kinda didn't write this. This book was edited and compiled just after his death, based on lecture notes that he wrote. So Alexander Mackendrick taught at UCL Film School. He taught people like Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas and that whole tranche of filmmakers coming out of LA, as well as being a fairly successful, prominent filmmaker in his own right in the 50s and 60s. Whilst I've never been a big fan of writing books, the chunk on writing in this is really good, as is all the stuff on editing and shooting and directing actors, and it's really good. It's also fairly dated. Some of that in technical ways, but some of that in ways like this drawing of a terrorist putting a bomb under a table. That's like it's illustrating a good point about filmmaking in that particular chapter and in that moment, but yeah, he wrote these lecture notes in the 80s, okay? There's another book which I'm reading at the moment called Making Movies by Sidney Lumet, which is really, really good and really interesting. Also incredibly dated. Less problematic, I think, but still incredibly dated. It talks a lot about filmmaking with the process of actual physical celluloid film, which obviously we don't use anymore. It goes into a lot of detail about like the rehearsal process and directing actors and choosing lenses, and yeah, I would highly recommend that one as well, probably as a follow-up to having read this. I think both my light over there is running out of battery and the sun behind me is getting behind the clouds a whole bunch, so I'm sorry if the light changed a whole bunch through this video. You've not seen this in a while, have you? So yeah, there's my sort of slightly overexcited ramble about books that have been really useful to me at university, and I hope it was useful to you as well, because studying film at university, that is a wild ride. If you like this video, feel free to click like, and also maybe the little subscribe button, and maybe like ring the little bell. That would be great, because I do make videos every week. At least I plan to, for the rest of this year. Let's hope I actually manage it. I also released a new short film last week. It's called Invite. People seem to like it a lot.
What makes you think you have a right to my time?
If you want to go check that out as well, that would be great, because I'm proud of it and everyone put in really good work. So thank you. That's the end of the video. Goodbye. Fare thee well.